So I told Victoria, what you really need to do is just kind of settle down, wait it out. You were at court yesterday. They're going to resolve this. So sure enough, not that day, Tuesday, but on Wednesday in the afternoon, I had a call from a mutual friend of ours and said, "Oh, did you hear Victoria's out?" And I said, "Well, not from her yet, but that's great." So Victoria called me Thursday and let me know she was out, and now she's all worried about probation because they're going to be sending the Gestapo after her any moment to kill her on probation, and we got to settle this, but at least she's out, and she passed that last test without doing another dishonor. Another issue is that I had a call from my friend Nick in Idaho this week. Now remember, Nick was prosecuted along with 3 other of his friends on using these closed checks on closed accounts in a lot of the stores like Walmart and everything else. And in those prosecutions, all 4 of the people went in and did an acceptance for value, a return for value, settlement and closure, and pled guilty to the facts. And the court did a pre-sentence in every case, and then they came in for sentencing, and they did their allocution statements. And in the past meetings, I've talked about Nick's allocution. I talked about the fact that he went through the 4 questions that the court judge usually has to resolve in sentencing. Things like, are you going to be a danger to the public if you're not in jail? Are you sincerely sorry for the crime that the straw man was charged with, committed, and which was found guilty of? Were you sincere in your effort and offering restitution and willing to accept some form of liability and punishment for your action? And of course, Nick came in and he resolved all those issues in the manner that we talked about. We talked about 2 of his other buddies, one guy that came in, and he was the one that told the judge that basically he had accepted for value, returned for value, asked for settlement and closure. He was the creditor, and because he was the creditor, the court couldn't do anything evil, terrible, or wrong to him, and that he deserved to go home. And of course, the judge put him in jail for 18 months and said that he was going to jail based on his lousy attitude, and if in jail he would be a prima donna and do everything right and obey all the orders in jail, they would consider releasing him in 6 months. The third guy is the one that we've talked about several times, and this particular gentleman was the one that filed his bankruptcy proceedings in federal court, and he attempted to have the federal bankruptcy court discharge the criminal liability from his state court criminal action. And remember, we talked about that here maybe a month or so back, because we said that this guy, when he was in sentencing in the criminal state action, the judge asked him whether he had read the sentencing, the pre-sentence report, and he said no. Then the judge said, well, let's take some time to read that before we proceed. And the guy said, no, I don't need to read no stinking report. Just go ahead with sentencing. And the judge emphasized to him that until he read the stinking report, they wouldn't proceed. And the guy insisted that it should be done. Just sentence me. So the judge said, how about this? How about we postpone sentencing for 30 days. And he gave the guy time to answer the question. He looked at his friends in the court and they go, well, you better agree. If you're in an argument with the judge, you're in dishonor. So agree. So he agreed. Then the judge said, and during that 30 days, with your consent, let's get a mental competency exam from you. And he looked at his friends in the audience again and they said, you better agree. So he said, okay, I agree. Well, remember we talked about the fact that the judge really didn't think that he per se was off his rocker. The judge was trying to tell him, you are dishonoring this court. And if you don't do what this court requests you to do, you're either crazy if you think I'm going to help you, or you think this court's crazy if we're going to go along with what you say. And I think we better check your competency first. So when this guy got out of court, my friend Nick had tried to have a talk with him. And in that talk, my friend Nick said, do you not understand you're dishonoring this court? And this guy, like a perfect patriot, believing that since he's accepted things for value, returned them for value, and asking for settlement and closure, that he is now the creditor in fact, that it doesn't make any difference anymore, and the judge had better just recognize he is the creditor. Doesn't that run afoul of everything that we have said earlier tonight? So, yeah, actually he went high instead of low to the court, which violates purposes of the presumptions of law, that to honor somebody else you go low and never high. So the good news is he went back to court this last week for his second sentencing. And my friend Nick, still trying to help his buddy out, decided he would drive him up there. Now, this guy that went through a bankruptcy did get his bankruptcy all right, but he was living in a house with a secured mortgage on it. And under the terms and condition of the bankruptcy, the owner of the mortgage got the right to sell the house because of the security interest therein that was registered. So when they got to the courthouse this particular morning, Nick and his friend were walking through the hallowed halls, and everybody, all the officials, the law enforcement officers, the sheriff's deputies, the clerks, up and down, coming out of the rooms into the halls, kept going, "Oh, hi, Nick. How are you doing?" And one of the sheriff's deputies came out and said to Nick, "Is that your friend so-and-so?" And Nick said, "Yes." "Would you please come on down and see me for a minute?" And so Nick and his friend walked down to the sheriff's office. And this sheriff's deputy said to Nick's friend, "I thought it would be better, since you're here now, if I brought this paperwork on your house to your attention rather than have to do this later or, in a more official fashion. You're here, you came into the room. Would you please sign these documents so that we can resolve the issue of removing your property from the house?" And Nick said his friend looked at the sheriff's deputy and kind of rolled a face and said something snotty like, "I'm not going to sign any of your paperwork. Whatever it is, and whatever it is done." And the sheriff's deputy just kind of politely said, "Okay, I will note that you refuse to sign." Then the deputy said, "It's nice seeing you again, Nick. It's nice that you stop by every now and then and say hello to us. How are things going?" And Nick said, "Fine." And Nick's buddy left the room. He couldn't stand it in there anymore. And the sheriff's deputy said to Nick, "We are really surprised that he came to court today. That's where he's going, isn't he?" And Nick said, "Yes, I told him he couldn't dishonor the court." And the sheriff's deputy said, "Everybody will be totally surprised. We were all betting he wouldn't show up." Well, Nick's friend went into the court, and Nick pleaded it with him a last time. Go in there, tell them you're sorry, tell them what you need to do. They don't want to put you in jail. And that guy went in there, and when the judge started asking him about this, that, and the next thing, he did almost a verbatim of his other buddy. I have accepted it, I have returned it, I've asked for settlement and closure, that's what I'm asking you to do. The judge almost pleaded with him and said, I have no alternative but to sentence you to jail for 24 months. And you are going to jail because of your attitude. But if you do well in that jail, just like I told your other buddy, if you follow the rules and you do what you're supposed to, we will consider bringing you out in 6 months. And my friend Nick said it was one of the hardest things he ever had to do. These are his friends, and none of them can understand that unless you look in the mirror and see that you are the responsibility and the problem, and you've got to go through these 4 steps from 1 to 4, not go through them backwards and try to buy your way out of a criminal charge, that you're not going to resolve this. The last thing I want to talk about this evening is something very interesting. If you ask the court to use your exemption to discharge the liability, isn't that exemption account kind of like an insurance account? Doesn't that like pay off the debts? Isn't that what insurance does? So if you say to the court, use my exemption in exchange for the costs, the fines, the fees, the settlements, what you're really saying is, use my insurance policy. Isn't that what you're doing? If you can look at this process in that manner, where does that insurance policy come from that we're using in terms of the exemption? The Father. Isn't that really the blood of the Messiah? Isn't that the commercial energy? So this insurance fund comes from the blood of the Messiah. If you go out and you are, quote, insured in an activity, let's say your automobile, and you go up and pile it up and create loss of life, damage to property, and people are in the hospital, and then somebody cites you as having been the fault of that accident, and you come in and go, oh, don't worry about it, just take it out of the insurance. You might have 2 problems. Thinking that your only responsibility is to pay the debt with the insurance may take care of the form of the repayment. But what does that do in terms of, I was responsible, I feel sorry, I ask for forgiveness before you ask for restitution? See, there's no substance at all in your pleading, only form by saying, what are you looking at? I have insurance. Take it out of the insurance. That's issue number 1. think seriously, even more important, issue number 2. Because you were covered with insurance does not necessarily imply the insurance company will pay a claim. Look at the contract. There are many terms and conditions in the insurance contract which negate the liability of the insurance company under certain conditions. For instance, if you were driving on a suspended license for DUI, it may be in the terms and conditions of the insurance policy that because your license was suspended, you're not covered for a payout. Now, just because you say to the victims, take it out of my insurance policy, does not guarantee there's going to be a settlement. Since the prepaid account, the exemption, comes from the blood of Christ, your brother, would he allow the insurance settlement to pay for damages from you in which you are not sorry? If you went out and raped someone and went into court and said, use the prepaid account and let me go back onto the street, do you think the insurance policy is going to be applicable and cover you in that circumstance? See, most of the patriots have been grasping at very simple concepts of what they believe the form of this process can accomplish for them. And what I am telling you is the judges and magistrates in their courts are the agents of the Father in this matter. And if they don't believe the insurance policy ought to cover your acts because of your attitude, it's not covered, and you're not going to discharge that case with the exemption. And I guarantee you, you are going to see some serious jail time, community activity, or some liability in terms of fines that they are not going to discharge by way of your request. And if you keep mandating that request and then bring lawsuits against these public officials for trespassing on your right to access that insurance policy when there is no substance behind you entitling to that payout from that policy, then the court official is acting as the agent of the insurance party, the insurer, and his denial of your requested payout by that exemption is going to come by his agency from the Father and not from trespassing against your private rights. So many of us patriots have got to rethink what it is that we have been doing. We have got to stop jumping to the conclusion that these public officials are the problem and denying us our remedies. The biggest problem comes from us. Next week I'm going to talk about an interesting aspect of the movie The Matrix 2. Remember in the review when I talked about the second conversation with Moravian? And Moravian was dressed in black, but his two guards were dressed in white. And remember, Moravian was one of the so-called nasty little programs running around in the Matrix. And what was Moravian's purpose? What was his role? What did he do? Didn't he protect the identity and the location of the keeper of the keys to unlock the whole matrix? So Moravian was the security for the system, was he not? It turns out that some people have gone on the internet and looked up Moravian. Would you like to know that Moravian is all over the internet? Would you like to know who Moravian is? Would you like to know what his relationship is to the modern one world, new world order? Would you like to know what his historic relationship has been to the kings of Europe and to the Vatican and to everything that's going on in many, many, many of the Hollywood movies? Yes, you are right. Tune in next week.